No, 14. guys able to hear us now on the phone? Yes, on both now. Okay.
Okay, good.
Apologize for that.
Oh, we can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
To hear.
Are we all set to go forward, or?
Jennifer, are you still not able to hear?
Well, I'll go back to, okay, give me the control of the clicker again, and I'll go back.
With your voice looking towards the screen, why not move the microphone until it's needed on the other side, on your other side?
That's not the issue.
Oh, it is, okay.
Right.
This is recorded so we can send it out as well.
Okay. So, this isn't working again. Okay. So I'm not going to repeat the whole thing, but I did talk about the cost of turnover and the kind of numerical cost of turnover, like what that causes. And so I just wanted people around the table just to make sure we're on the same page. How does being short-staffed, how does not having employees, what are some of the things that causes pain for your business?
Quality of care. Sure.
Right, so the individuals aren't getting the quality of care that they deserve and need, right? What else?
Can't grow. Yeah.
You can't.
Can't grow. We've been in a holding pattern for the last 2 years because we can't go outside of the counties that we're already in, and we have now gotten to the point we can't accept folks within the counties we're in. Right.
Yeah, and historically, seriously, we've been a development company, and the last couple of years, my nonprofit board is saying, "Yeah, what? Are you getting old?" Well, that was true. But on the other side, that was it, and it's a double cost too, because it isn't just the orientation, which in some ways we think you get a 1 in 6 success rate after 90 days. That the cost of the 5 or 4, but it's also the cost of overtime that the lack of success with orientation creates. So it's a double mix. But we line ours up on orientation costs, but then we also look at marrying that with overtime costs.
Right.
And then we actually, the folks who are there we're burning them out.
Yeah, get more turnover, some burnout, yeah.
You know, just watching that, and you feel pretty helpless.
And those are certainly, it is a vicious cycle.
What we're seeing on our exit interviews, according to Scott, is historically, there's always been better pay, but it's being replaced with family.
Yes.
And that is so hurtful. I mean, it's just.
Right. Go ahead.
We need that continuously, and there's no end in sight. So it's one thing to get through a short time of crisis, but this is just
They want more
constant.
They want more time off.
And I don't know, the erosion of commitment just because people aren't out at the supervisory level. The waiver is already a flawed system on supervisors anyway, because if you don't have eyes on in those locations, then those supervisors have no life.
Well, we have some, and Christine has some comments from online as well.
Tracy says overtime costs, burnout of staff, no time off for our staff, level of care decreases with our tired staff. Jennifer, the expenses of training new staff, and Bobby says high turnover in leadership, which is what we.
Right. So you're seeing it's affecting everything, isn't it? And one of the things, and this is a little teaser to whet your appetite, but the last part, I'm going to save some of the results that we've had to the end of my presentation, but it helps with all that stuff. And one of the things that I've been really pleased with is the unintended consequences like where I didn't even think, and others did not think that some of the things that would be impacted, but they were impacted, right? It's amazing how it's worked. So thank you for that. Anybody else online have a comment? Christine? That's good? Okay. So there's 4 main components of what we did, and this is what, you know, I came into this, you know, as I mentioned in my introduction, my first professional job was as a workshop specialist 2 at Wood Lane Industries back in the day. And so I had that experience. I became a behavior specialist and self-employed for about 8 years doing that work as well. But I came into this project through my connection with Bridges Out of Poverty. So these were the basic components of the program that we did in Toledo, Lucas County. Bridges Out of Poverty training for the employers, administrators, HR, supervisors, and managers. And we'll drill down into this a little deeper. Getting ahead in the workplace training for the employees who are dealing with daily instability. We talk about this in other ways. Folks where one crisis sets off a chain reaction where there's multiple crises that interfere with work. Another way of saying that is under-resourced, that they don't have enough resources. And I'll talk about that further in a bit as well. And another is to say folks are from generational poverty, where they were raised in poverty, their parents were raised in poverty, and maybe their grandparents and beyond were raised in poverty. The third component is the employer resource networks, ERNs, which we'll talk about, and then employer-sponsored small dollar loans, which we had been doing in Toledo since 2014. And the other piece is communities of practice. So that's the 5. So a community of practice is a group of people that are coming together to work on continuous improvement. And in a sense, this committee is a community of practice. In Ohio, we have Bridges Out of Poverty communities of practice, where people are working together on teams to do things that raise prosperity for the entire community. And that's a key thing. You may or may not, you might have a community of practice in your neighborhood. If you do, you can utilize that community of practice for this work. If you don't have that community of practice, you can build one or get connected with one. And that's part of what we're going to offer or propose today as well. I like this slide. Right? Does that make sense based on your experience? How do you get somebody stable? Well, there's a way, there's a path. It's kind of confusing. It's difficult to understand. It's not just difficult to understand for folks that are trying to deal with the system and get stable. It's difficult to understand for all of us as well. And one of the things that helps you understand that path is the Bridges Out of Poverty concept. So there's Bridges Out of Poverty trainings, and these next 2 slides are designed, on the left-hand side is solutions for folks with resources. Those are for folks, tend to be middle or upper income people who aren't dealing with daily instability, or if you occasionally do, it's corrected pretty quickly. Or solutions for under-resourced folks. Those are folks that, based on lack of resource, again, I mentioned that, where one problem sets off a chain reaction where you're just solving problems all day. And so community resource, we have Bridges Out of Poverty training, and getting ahead, the getting ahead in a just getting by world was the community training for folks from generational poverty. it's the same concepts delivered in a different way. I'll talk more about that in a bit. K through 12, framework for understanding poverty. That's for K through 12 teachers, administrators, folks that are working directly with folks in schools. And then there's our rules and also getting ahead for parents of K through 12. Getting ahead in the workplace training and hidden rules of class at work. I have a couple copies of those books. Who thinks they have the birthday closest to today? When was your birthday?
Oh, close to the month, March.
March what? 16th. Anybody closer than that? Okay, so either front or back. So I've got copies of the Workplace Stability, Hidden Rules of Class at Work, and Getting Ahead in the Workplace manual. So I'm going to pass this around, and you can choose which one you want. Happy birthday. It's a little, you know, I know not all of you could make it, but just if there's not enough reasons to feel jealous, you've got another one. So then there's actually criminal justice. There's tactical communication, which is Bridges Out of Poverty training for first responders, Bridges to Health and Healthcare, and higher education, understanding and engaging under-resourced college students. That's for higher ed folks, teachers, and administrators. And then investigations into economic class in America is the Getting Ahead for under-resourced college students. So we have all those resources. Some of these you may use in your work as you develop this program. I think in particular, along the bottom here, the workplace stability training is the Bridges Out of Poverty for business. And the Getting Ahead in the Workplace is for under-resourced employees, right? And then the understanding and engaging, you may have partnerships with folks from higher ed, and you may need training for your employees that you partner with community colleges. So that may be something that you do in your community. There are community, you know, I talked about communities of practice. So there are Bridges Out of Poverty communities of practice around the world. Ohio, Phil Duvall, who wrote Getting Ahead and did all the Getting Ahead in the Workplace manuals and all those things. Phil Duvall is from Morrow County and still lives in Ohio. And actually Ruby Payne, who's from the original author of Framework for Understanding Poverty, is from Ohio as well. We have a lot of communities of practice in Ohio, and I'm going to be working with Opera and others to make those communities of practice known, so you know who to contact locally. You know where to get help. One of the things I wanted to say today is there's this tension between making this as simple as possible, like my presentation and the information on, like, you know, I just was looking at the slides and we're talking about Scotland and Slovakia, you know, that may not connect or resonate with you, and that's okay. I want to make it as simple as possible, and at the same time, as we're going through this, it is very complex, right? This stuff is complex. Let me take this moment to ask another question, and I really want responses both from our folks that are calling in and from the folks in the room. If you want to decrease highway fatalities, what do? What are some of the things you can do to decrease highway fatality? Educate in what way? So there's different ways you can educate, right? Like you could do driver's ed courses. You could make driver's ed courses more available, right? What else could you do?
Safer cars.
You can build cars that are safer. There's you know what the thing that has made more difference than any other safety improvement on cars since seatbelts it's rollover technology, so that cars that, you know, are built in the last year are much less likely to roll over. What else?
Someone could drive it for me.
Yeah. So having skilled drivers who
Or
driverless vehicles, perhaps. So let me give a few other examples. One is you license people. Another is you have police on patrol. Another is you have better signage. You build different things like apparently roundabouts, although some people are frustrated by them. They're much safer, actually, the research shows. All sorts of things, right? You do multiple things. You don't do one thing, you do a bunch of things. And that's where when I'm talking about the complexity, it's like there is no one size fits all in this. And this is the other thing I wanted to talk about. There's a lot of things we need to do, and we need to do them in different order in different communities. And so that, just to get those two things out, it's complex. We want to make it as simple as possible today, but there's a lot of things that need to happen in order to make it work well. And sometimes they have to happen in different order based on what your struggle is. And I'll give some other examples. Does that make sense? Okay. So the Bridges model isn't a program. It's actually a set of concepts or strategies that you can implement. And once you get into the Bridges model and you start to understand it, you start to see opportunities everywhere to do these three things that are listed: to improve relationships on an individual level, to improve outcomes at an organizational level, and to change systems on the community level. So if you're thinking about how to, you know, that relates to retention and survival of your staff. How do you do those things at all those levels? And then you can support folks in transition and help them to build resources so they are more grateful, loyal, connected, inspired, team-playing employees. So one of the key things, this is the way I always like to describe Bridges Out of Poverty, is that for middle and upper income folks, for folks that are relatively stable, going through a day one Bridges Out of Poverty training allows folks to get a common language and understanding of what poverty is, so they can identify it and see it, and then start to change their individual behaviors and their policies within their organization so that they can be more successful with either their customers who are coming from generational poverty or their employees, so that they can recognize the talents and support the growth of their employees. And it's a great way. The other thing is it's a stereotype buster. It's like if you go through one of these, how many people around the table have been through Bridges Out of Poverty training? Does that resonate? Did you, where you come out of it and you have a different viewpoint, right? And even if you can't pick it up right away, but you at least know to question, what is this really about? We had a story, Patty from Josina Lott said there was a woman that had been a really good staff, and she was suddenly showing up late to work. She'd gotten written up. It had gotten to the point where they were going to dismiss her. And based on going through the Bridges Out of Poverty training, she said, you know, I just want to have one more meeting to find out what's going on. And what had happened was, she had the meeting, and the staff person was doing elder care. Right? So she's on a different shift. She's doing elder care. The demands of that were getting in the way of her getting into work on time. When she was given the policy on what she's supposed to do if she's late, and she was literate, the staff person was literate, but in the meeting, what they discovered was she wasn't literate enough to be able to follow that policy. And basically, they just said, look, if you're going to be late, call Janet as soon as you know you're going to be late. That solved the problem, right? And it was taking that extra look, having a sense of understanding. Here's a good staff person. We don't know what's going on. How can we figure out? And one of the problems that gets solved through this approach that we're doing is that problem, because HR they don't always have the time to do that, right? And they may not want to do it on some occasions. So we're gonna talk about that. These are if you've been through the Bridges Out of Poverty trainings, one of the things we do in Bridges Out of Poverty is we identify the mental models of class. It's basically, if you grow up in a certain economic environment, that shapes the way you view the world. There's a great quote from the Talmud, probably the only quote I've memorized, but we see the world not as it is, but as we are. You know, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. We see the world through the lens of our own experience. And if you've grown up in a certain environment and you have hidden rules and norms that have been survival value for you, that's how you operate, that's how everybody does it, then you're going to carry that everywhere you go, and it's going to shape your view of the world. And folks that were raised in middle class environments tend to have achievement values, where it's like, you know, you do whatever you can to get into work on time no matter what. That's the priority. And if you're dependent on relationships for survival, that's how you survive based on your people and who's supporting you, then you're going to have a different norm around that. And you may say, hey, I'm not coming into work today because I've got to take care of my aunt or my neighbor's kids even, because they give me food when I need it, or they drive me places when I need it. So this is part of what the Bridges information does. And it's also, this is a key one, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, and I really encourage you to go through a training, but we tend to look at poverty through a particular lens. We all have our own biases, and some of us see poverty as an individual problem. Some of us see it as an institutional problem, and some as a community problem, and some policy. Most people tend to see things, and I think this is like built into our DNA, and our brains are hardwired this way, but we see things in terms of individuals. Whose fault was it? You know, we want to assign credit or blame, and sometimes we don't look at other forces that are happening that affect things. So we talk about that. And one of the things we do as well, this is a tool from Bridges Out of Poverty to solve one problem at a time. When you're looking at community problems, again, back to the example of how to decrease traffic fatalities on the highway. If you're looking at that one problem, you may say, well, we're going to pass a law to lower the speed limit. That'll save lives. And then we're going to educate people. We're going to put out signs on just to remind them that, you know, traffic conditions are bad or things are unsafe. How can you have an organization? There's an organization that may, you know, promote anti-drunk driving messages, right? So there's all these ways you deal with it. And one of the, so this helps with that. I may have a slide on this one later, but this basically says you've got to solve any problem, you've got to address all these causes. And if you think about this in your workplace, this is key. That is staff behavior at work their problem? I mean, are they responsible for fixing that? Yeah, right? I mean, people, that's an individual cause. I remember, I'm going to give I used to teach, does anybody remember COPE trainings back in the day? So I was a certified COPE instructor, and I taught a lot of people COPE, and the first training I did for the Lucas County Board of DD, they scheduled it. They wanted their transportation staff trained because they had never gotten any training. And they did it on a Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday night from like 5:30 to 9:30 each night, like, or something like that, at 5:30 to 10 each night, because they didn't want to interrupt the folks' work schedule. So they had worked during the day. They didn't pay them for being there, and they required it. It was mandatory. And I didn't know this, but I come in all fresh to do this training, and for 20 transportation staff, what do you think their attitude was like? Right? How do you think their behavior was? Right? So I do this training. After the first night, I get wind of this, right? I realize what's going on. Like, oh no, I am not going through another 6 hours of training with these people, unless it. So after that, they restructured it so they had them train during their regular work hours. They were paid to be there. They didn't have to get childcare. They didn't have to, all that. Guess what happened to their attitude? Did their attitude improve? Yeah, it did. So it's connected, right? So we changed the policy. We didn't work on their individual. The COPE training was working on their attitudes and their thinking. So anyway, that's one of my favorite examples of that. One of the key things that brought bridges out of poverty is that poverty is defined by lack of resources, right? Is poverty just about financial? No. Look at the studies on lotto winners. I just read another story on that. It's, what is it, something like 90% of lotto winners go bankrupt within 5 years. It's not just about money. It's about other resources. Do you know people that don't have a lot of money that are emotionally solid, that you love to be around? You just love their attitudes? People that have motivation and persistence, work hard, that have integrity. These are all things that we value. This is what people, a lot of those things, spiritual resources, whether or not you believe in God, but that you believe in a purpose. You have a purpose in life. Or you have a culture of support that supports your goals. So all these things, and we'll talk about this in the Getting Ahead in the Workplace session, but this notion of what that you actually need to build these resources, that's what gets you stable. Frequently, having more money in your pocket is not the most important thing. It's these other resources that will get you the money later. Any questions about anything? Christine, any questions online? Okay, thank you.
Good time for Lisa.
Good. Okay. Good time for what?
For Lisa.
Actually, I got a better time.
Okay.
We'll make sure to talk. Yeah. So, or you could. Yeah, that's okay. Go ahead, Lisa. Yeah. Go ahead. Do you want to talk about your survey that you did?
Sure. I'll say first of all, being the chair of the workforce committee has been the easiest thing I've ever done. I think we met twice. Anita ran meetings both times in the last 2 years.
And then we had a grant.
Gentlemen, with the grant and all of the information that we're hearing today. So kudos to you. Thank you very much. I've had very little to do with as the chair of this committee. But this is the workforce crisis is the single biggest thing that takes up my time and Kim. Kim is my business and HR director. And we are just really at a loss at this point what in the world to do. And 2 years ago, when we first had the conversation about what will it take to attract and retain staff, we had some ideas about what we thought. We talked around the table in general about what we thought it would take. And 2 years later, anticipating today's meeting, I sent out a message to all of my direct support staff over the weekend and asked them, what is your biggest frustration with working as a JSP? What are the rewards that keep you here though. And, I wanted to hear from DSP staff, from management staff, from everybody, what is your view on what it is that keeps you committed to what we do? And by and large, the comments were identical from, short-term staff, long-term staff alike. I'll just go through these just very quickly. Improve the in-home training, making a specific person responsible for new hires or in-home training. And could be done with a more comprehensive on-call system or possibly a second shift supervisor. We need to have more support available after the office closes, like a second shift supervisor. Have schedules available for more than 1 week at a time. Advocate for a more positive atmosphere. And the comments were, DSP reported overall the atmosphere is great, but that some staff encourage drama and childishness. Some of the younger staff in particular need more direction and support, my millennials, and when that isn't available, immature behavior results, and we seem to be attracting more and more younger staff. Encourage a more mission-focused atmosphere, and I love this. I love this, because I feel like we do, but then the comments came. People feel that they want to be a part of something bigger than they are, even if they haven't experienced it before. Once they get a feel of what it's like at our HDD, they take pride in what it is that they do, and they want to be a part of promoting our mission. People hear the mission and philosophy from me constantly, but local management aren't perceived to be as committed as I am. And child care reimbursement, or some sort of help with the cost of child care. I wanted to note, although there were several side comments from staff about pay and benefits, those topics were brought up after the topics above were brought up. So we thought originally, from the very impassioned conversation that we had before the workforce committee was created, that it was more about money. And of course, nobody is going to turn down if there's more money, but people who are in the field for the right reasons are going to stay regardless. Pay and benefits, when you get into healthcare, are not fantastic. And I think people have, for the most part, grudgingly accepted that. Being able to pay more will always be our priority, and we'll continue to try to squeeze more and more out of the HPC rate every single year, and we always manage to somehow. But overall, it's the feeling of being supported, being a part of something bigger than themselves. And I still feel that 2 years later, this is what we originally thought, and if we can get buy-in from the people in this room on the call to make our staff feel more supported, more a part of something larger than them, possibly we'll start to see a change in retention rates.
So we had someone ask if you'd be willing to share your findings.
Yeah, it's a real simple one sheet. Yeah, I'll send it to Anita.
I'll send it out.
She can send it out to everybody. Yep.
Can I ask too, the makeup of where your staff are doing their services and supports? Is it predominantly in the one-to-one situation or group settings?
All over the place. All over the place. We have licensed group homes, we have drop-in services, some just transportation. It's all over the place. So, and the comments that I got were from folks from all over the place. But I think, and this is just my observation, in addition to these comments, I feel like if we can provide a more stable work life, their home life will follow. Mm-hmm. And when we're constantly calling them in because somebody called off and because their child is sick and they end up quitting, so I've got to call them in again for the second, it's a never-ending cycle. So we create part of the chaos that's in their life. And if I could just put a freeze on everybody that I employ's ability to quit. You are not allowed to quit. 1 year. And we can add to our numbers rather than replacing and then barely adding to our numbers. That would fix everything.
I agree. I mean, when we ask, what would cause you to continue to work for us?
Yes.
I don't want to work 60 hours. Assure me that I'm not going to work 60 hours.
And I can't.
And the problem is then we lose our message right there.
And I'll tell you something also that, and Kim and I have to work on this together. My management staff have gotten into a rut because this has been going on for so long. They're burned out too. They're looking at schedules as something that they've they've got to piece together with every last hour that they can eke out of every last staff person that they have. And they're starting to lose sight of the bigger picture, and I hope and pray none of my management staff are listening to this. I love it. But I'll give you an example. I had a conversation with, I'm on social media, and I'm deep into social media, and that's how I get a lot of interaction with my staff, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. There have been a couple of times where they've, you know, I'm not going to get into that. Things can go inappropriate, and you jump the chain of command occasionally, but I put a stop to that. But a conversation that I had with a gentleman who's worked with us for years. He was frustrated, and he was just venting in a conversation to me, and I let him vent. He'd worked a 2.5-day shift with us forever with a gentleman who was really tough for staff. And rather than the 40 hours that he was typically scheduled, he was working 60 hours, 70 hours, because the gentleman that he works with is not easy to staff. There are very specific requirements that you have to be as a person to work there. There are specific trainings that you have to have, and he's a very difficult gentleman to appropriately support. So we go through staff there pretty frequently, and it's frustrating, and he's a constant. And that's great, and that's the source of pride for a period of time, until you start missing out on your kids' basketball games. And you're willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that your guy is supported until you feel taken advantage of. And he's gotten to that point, because we have enough staff in there now, but getting back to the supervisor in that region, she's not agreed to put him back on the schedule that he was on originally. And that's to accommodate other people who have come in who stopped the bleed. So he's on 40 hours, but it's not on the hours that work for him because of his kids. So it's frustrating, because the managers are doing the best that they can to accommodate everybody on a larger scale, and I get that. But again, I need to freeze everybody's ability to quit for 1 year, get fully staffed, and then stop the chaos.
You know, something that we probably ought to be thankful for that is surprising in our field has not occurred. There's a massive amount of organization.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
I mean, we do signs and symptoms all the time, because this is ripe for one more stress, which is to sit down and organize a union contract. And it's surprising right now, except I think they understand they don't have a solution either.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to do, and I'm so, as you were talking, I'm so pleased because we have solutions, and I'm gonna give you examples of how to solve this, or what the actual results were. So, and just before we go on, that was really well said. Just a show of hands around the table. Did that resonate with people? Like, that makes sense? Yeah, people agree with that kind of assessment. You're facing the same problems, right?
And to kind of add to that,
Yeah.
why, since a lot of times you think about the staff turnover and why we have losing staff. I work in our large ICF, so, you know, I have over 125 DFCs, and, you know, the turnover is really high. So I took a step back and said, let's worry less about the turnover and more about the supervisors.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's really made a difference. What do I do with that? It's really made a difference in really acknowledging getting more training for our supervisors and really rewarding them and giving them that empowerment to make decisions, but yet guide them along the way. And, you know, for the last 6 months, it's worked.
Right.
Our retention in our kids building is much better.
Right.
And even though the data doesn't always reflect that, you can see a core team now developing on every unit,
Lovely.
every shift. But I kind of got so much in a rut about why are we losing people? It's so frustrating. It's so frustrating that I just said, okay, what can I do with my 18 supervisors to make this work? I just bombarded them with once a month meetings, you know, sending them out to trainings. We have an in-house Sherpa coach, just rewarding them with vending coupons, just every little thing I could think of. And they're happier, which we don't have the issue, we're going to have the issue because we're going to be opening group homes here soon, 8-bed group homes. So we're going to have the issue of staffing that and on-call, which we don't really have right now. So I'm trying to build a culture of getting those people into the group homes from our existing staff that have that positive attitude to start the group homes with, rather than hiring from outside and having to train everybody. But it's amazing to me how much time I've just spent on the supervisors, and it's worked.
Right. That's a great example. And can I ask, have you done Bridges Out of Poverty training?
No, we have not.
No. Okay, so I just want to say that as an example. So the training that you've provided has made a difference, right? Because you put your attention there, you put your energy there, you knew that was a part of the problem. They feel more supported, they're passing that support on. Then if you layer other things on it as well, so the Bridges Out of Poverty training, you've gotten a little more stability. Bridges Out of Poverty training may do more.
Right.
And then there's all these other things that you can do, and that's what you start to see happen. So let me just keep going so we keep going. This is I love this slide because it illustrates this difference. And it, again, the Bridges Out of Poverty training is complex and it's a lot, and but after a day one training, you get a lot out of it. But this core concept here, that there's a difference between resources that help people get by financially, or get by emotionally, or get by physically, and there's resources that help them get ahead. It's the difference between, we call it bringing resources or building resources. That's the old, bring a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach him to fish, he eats for a lifetime, right? It's like, how do you start to change the way you help people so they're actually building resources and then they're becoming more stable? And that has to do with training again, back to that illustration. You're helping them spread the wealth by training. So a little bit about getting ahead in the workplace, and getting ahead is the Bridges Out of Poverty for folks that are under-resourced again. And it allows people frequently for the first time in their lives to actually reflect on their circumstances and be able to put attention on something. One of the things I kind of, to get as an empathy bridge, how many people around the table are parents? Okay. How much, what's that?
Grandparents?
Sure. Yeah. So how much time do you have to actually reflect on the experience of being a parent? Right? Yeah, I don't know if you heard the laughter, but it's like not much. You're so busy being a parent, it's hard to really reflect. But if you have time away where everything else is covered, and you get a chance to get some support and talk about it and see some of the dynamics and share information with other people, that's huge. That really helps improve your quality of parenting. And for many people, if you've been through the Bridges Out of Poverty day one, there was a moment for me after my first training, and I'm a diversity trainer, a team building trainer from way back. I've been doing this work since my 20s, right? And so, that's about 40 years now. And I knew a lot. And I went into my first Bridges Out of Poverty training in 2005, and the first time I saw the mental model of poverty. And I'm working with folks in poverty. I have friends who are living in poverty. And I saw that mental model, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is why the kids that I work with act the way they do. This is it. It's that and when folks go through getting ahead, they go, oh, this is why my life is the way it is. It's fascinating to see.
They don't call it AHA process
for nothing, right? So you have this, they go through this and they start to learn how to build resources. They choose the resources that they want to build. And they start working on building those resources. And when it's at the workplace, it makes this huge change in how they feel about work and what they see their role being. All that stuff about having passion. and having a purpose and a commitment and feeling like we're working on this together. So, you know, it's dealing with these issues of how you get from extremely unstable environments to more stable environments, and how can you do things differently as managers and administrators and HR to support your staff to get there, and then you're helping them get their needs met, and then they are looking at you as somebody who's there, who cares about them, that values them.
Can I
Yeah.
insert something right now that's, it's way over in the parking lot, but yet it's still an initiative I think we're going to be facing, that either we look at it as unfair or as a potential remedy to our part of our workforce crisis, is working with Representative Jim Jordan right now on the work requirements of all federal poverty and
The Medicaid
programs.
Yep.
And what right now, just in messaging, Jim is beginning to use the word incentivize rather than penalize. And he's a conservative Republican, but he gets the idea that we don't need a bad attitude coming in and applying for a job. Meaning, I really don't want the job, I just apply because then that means I get to keep my benefits. And that we need individuals that want to come and work. And then looking at the employer, which is us around here, that we're so desperate right now, we'll do the training and things, but on the other side, incentivize us to really look at the behavioral change too, which I think just starts marrying your concept with the potential of saying, we're not going to pay individuals not to work, in a sense, that are able-bodied.
Right.
And I'm just, the more I look at that and how they continue to message that with federal, now, obviously the state has to realize that they don't have an unemployment problem now, they have an employment problem.
Right.
And as good Republicans, they want to emphasize what they've conquered, which is unemployment, when they're running for office, rather than saying, don't bring your industries here because we don't have any workforce. You're never going to see that messaging. So it's really tough to break that ceiling of saying, wait, you've got to start working on how you recruit workforce, and we're a prime example. So my question is that, not question, but statement is, what you're heading towards is, to me, would be marrying some of the efforts to change our unemployment insurance, to change our SNAP program, or things of that kind. So that's something that I would like to move on to another, how do I put this? I'd like to, the bridges of poverty, and say, Jim, look at this.
Right.
You know, so.
Right. Well, I can give you a book to pass on to him if you'd like.
We need something you can read.
Right. And it's really interesting. These concepts, you know, one of the things, have you heard the purple solutions? You know, with the thing is that, you know, Democrats are blue and Republicans are red, right? You got blue states and red states. And these are purple solutions. They combine the best thinking of both liberal and conservative ideologies. And, you know, if you go through the Bridges Out of Poverty training, I'm not going to do it today, but there's a whole piece on this that relates to this, that the first two areas of research into what causes poverty are poverty is caused by individual behaviors and circumstances, poor choices, lack of education, lack of motivation. Stereotypically, people say lazy, right? And lack of social supports. And the third and the fourth are exploitation, and including the isms, but also current exploitation, like rent to own and payday lending and businesses that are designed to rip people off and get as much as they can, and policies and laws. And conservatives tend to believe that the causes of poverty are primarily individual choices and behaviors and lack of social supports. And liberals tend to believe that the causes of poverty are exploitation and policies, that if we only stopped racism and raised the minimum wage, we wouldn't have poverty. Who's right? Nobody is, and everybody is. And what we need to do is address, sometimes are bad choices the reason somebody's in trouble? Yeah, absolutely. You can't, you can't say individuals bear no responsibility. They do. That's a fact. Most people agree on that. But it's not just that. And what we tend to do is we tend to really focus on individuals, as I said before, and there's more to it. So the other thing related to what you were saying was that and we'll talk more about this, but it's how can the business have an internal partner who's supporting somebody that is also being supported by organizations and institutions outside of the workplace? And how do you make that link? That's what I call a cross-sector initiative, where you've got a public-private partnership all working toward the same goal, which is to have stable individuals and families and communities. And so that does relate. That's a great comment. Here's a graduation. See that young guy back in the back? It's like I looked at that last night. I'm like, holy, what happened? It's only 12 years. Only 12 years ago. But that was one of the first getting ahead classes that I co-facilitated. Crystal, my colleague, was taking the picture. That was the graduation celebration. So people come together as a group. They have support, and they go through this experience together, and then they work to build resources together and with middle-class allies as well. So I want to talk about James Vanderhulst and ERN USA. We're going to talk about ERNs. And again, I made that distinction earlier in the presentation about wanting to make things simple today, but then also acknowledging the complexity of implementation. When we started the ERN, the employers around the table didn't fully understand it, and I didn't either. I'm an early innovator, so I can hear an idea and I'm like, oh, I'm on that, I'm for it, charge ahead. I'm that kind of person. But some of the people around the table did not get it, and it took months for them to really start to get it, and some of them never did, frankly, but most of them did. And I've heard people that CEOs at companies that have had ERNs, they've been doing them for 6 years, that said it took them 1.5 years to fully comprehend what it was about, right? So I want to acknowledge that complexity. James Vanderhulst and ERN USA, this is the person and the organization that knows the most about ERNs. And we have access, actually, we've got 2 organizations in Ohio that are now leading ERN Ohio. And one of them is me, through Lucas County Family Council, that we're working with James to implement the ERNs with fidelity, to support communities, to get them going. The longer you do them, the less you need us. You need us most the first year to get it set up and running right. But after that, it's like we start moving out of the picture and it's only as needed. And some ongoing maintenance kind of stuff that you'd mostly do with ERN USA. But we've got the resources in here to set this up to do it correctly. And James is awesome. I've never been disappointed with, he's got so much information. So did you want to? No? Okay. The Employer Resource Network is a group of people, and the way it actually works is, and let me say this meeting today, I actually in my head have called this the kickoff meeting for ERNs. So everybody here, consider this your orientation to this process. The next step would be to come back to a meeting with James and probably Heidi and I to talk about actually who wants to be on board with an ERN. And at the end of that meeting, and we could potentially do some interim meetings to get more people engaged. I just looked at Anita when I said that, but at that next meeting, at the end of that meeting, the outcome is that if you decide at the end of that meeting that you want your organization to be a founding member of an ERN, that you commit an HR staff for 3 months to get it developed, right? And then at the end of that 3 months, you can still opt out. If you go, Lloyd, we just can't do this right now, or I'm not on board, I'm not convinced, whatever, then at the end of that 3 months, you opt out. But if you decide to go on with it, that's where you pony up some money and put some skin in the game to get on board with an ERN. And usually the way we like to do that is, and I'll talk more about this as we go through, but it's half of the success coach's salary. Because a big part of what the ERN does, a core piece of it, the companies on the ERN buy shares in a staff person whose job it is to keep their staff on the job, right? And I'll go drill into this a little deeper as we go forward. So there's all these benefits from having a network, and it's called Employer Resource Network for a reason. It's a network. It's more than one organization. And through working together, you can increase economy of scale. A small organization can be involved and they can pay less. And you can go together on trainings, and you can see what trends are happening in your community. The HR folks meet once a month, and they have a dashboard report and see what's going on. A bunch of advantages, and you'll see some of the evidence as we go. So talked about the success coach. They work for the employers. They need to be hired by somebody else. So what we did in Toledo, the Lucas County Board of DD actually hired the success coach. But for the first time ever, they had the ERN representatives were in the interview, right? And they wanted to hire their Board of DD staff. They wanted to hire from within. And the first round of interviews, the representatives from the providers said, no, there's nobody here that we want. That was huge. This grant, we had to deliver it in a year. We had a year to deliver, and we didn't get the money till a month late from the state. We didn't get approval to start. So we were all like, we got to get this up and going. And a key piece of it is hiring the success coach and getting them hired. And we wanted it to happen, but they said no. And so the success coach didn't get hired till the end of December and didn't start really until early January, mid-January. So our results are actually for the year of 2017, where the success coach was actually on the job. It took about 3 months for them to get going even. So it wasn't until March we really started seeing a lot of work getting done. But in Toledo, Lucas County, our first ERN, they were hired by the board, but they are beholden to the employers. So that those employers are the ones, they run the ERN. It's their decision. It's never anybody else's decision. What happens in those meetings, what they decide to do together, that's up to them. That's part of the innovation. It's not somebody imposing, and there is no cookie cutter approach. What did you say earlier, Anita?
If you've seen one ERN, you've seen an ERN.
Yeah, if you've seen one ERN, you've seen one ERN. They are all different. And yet, as I said before, it's really important that there is a certain amount of fidelity, and that's where James and the ERN USA and ERN Ohio can help you do it right. So this was the name that the ERN chose. Again, it was their decision. It was nobody else's decision. They decided to call it Earned Success ERN. Get it? So, and it started with 8 providers. This is how the success coach was paid, is that the ERN employers decide how many shares they need. So we had 2 employers with over 300 employees bought 2 shares. Now this was subsidized. This is the full cost of the employee. But so this was subsidized, but I wanted to put out the full cost because that's really what you're mostly looking at. 1 share was a half day a week. There were 2 organizations that bought a half day every week. And then there were 4 organizations that had less than 100 employees each that bought a half share every other week. So that's roughly saying that's how much time the success coach is going to spend with those organizations. Any questions about the ERNs or the success coach? And again, we'll talk about the results. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could give maybe one or 2 examples of how that really worked well. Or are you going to do that?
I can do that now for the success coach.
Yeah, maybe some.
So here's an example of what the success coach. So for example, there was a woman that was she had dental insurance through the provider, but both of her kids had a bunch of dental problems. I think they had, like, one had an abscess and one had something else going on. Her kids were in pain, right? The dental insurance covered some of it, but there was still $1,000 that wasn't covered. And she wound up talking to the success coach, who investigated different options for how they might be able to get that handled. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about, employer-sponsored small dollar loans in a minute, but that was the solution for her, that she was able to recommend that she get an employer-sponsored small dollar loan. She got one for the rest of the money, so she was able to pay for her kids to get their teeth taken care of. Kids were no longer in pain. She was happy. They were happy. Another one was a woman who came from, she was recently divorced and had to get a job, and she wound up working for the organization, but she lost her health care, and health care hadn't been picked up yet. So she wasn't due for health care at the new organization, and she had medication for psychological problems that she had. And so they were able to go to a local agency, get the medication that day paid for, to have it covered until her insurance kicked in, and she was able to arrange all that. So she had her medication in the interim. Just multiple examples like that. Another thing is, if people, one of the things that a number of organizations have done is, anytime somebody gets too, late, they come into work late twice, HR will do whatever discipline or consequences that they have for that. But then it's like you have a mandatory meeting with a success coach, and our success coach is Faith. And so they say, you go talk to Faith. And so Faith then talks with them. What's going on? Frequently, there's an issue beyond that, underneath it. And she'll work to solve those problems. And I'll give there's been multiple, it's just a whole variety of things that have happened, around transportation and childcare. Another one was, setting up childcare for, they had, the employee was due at work at 8. The school didn't open its doors until 8:30. There was no child care that covered the difference. Faith helped her get child care that not only bridged the gap, but then transported the child to school, because they had transportation. And it was at less cost than the employee thought it would be. Problem solved. Dealing with those things of feeling like they're seen, they're cared about, somebody's helping them solve their problems that are getting in their way of their being at work. You know, just massive stuff. So
I just did want to say, even if an employer says, you know, you have a mandatory meeting with faith, the employer never knows what goes on in those meetings unless the employee wants to. It's all anonymous, which has, I think, helped with people accessing services of the success coach. We noted that, you know, when employers have employee assistance programs, that they're very rarely utilized, and we think it's because people feel like the employer is going to know exactly what's going on with them. So we've had a lot of success with people accessing the ERN as compared to the stats we had with the EAPs.
And it was really you know, that's why it was so important. You know, you were nodding your head when I said they didn't hire the first. It's got to be the right people. That success coach is crucial. It's got to be the right person. It's somebody that can speak to the businesses and deal with their issues, but also be relatable and trustworthy and caring and competent to help folks solve their problems. And they've got to be somebody that can really learn, because like Faith came in and it was a learning curve because she wasn't used to dealing with those community issues. So, you know, one of the things that the community of practice supported her with was connecting her with all these other resources and who to contact around that. But that is a critical position. But word of mouth got out, right? So other employees started saying, you know, one employee gets helped and then they say, oh, you got to talk to Faith, she can help you. Or supervisors, once they start to hear, they hear what's going on, they go talk to Faith, maybe she can help you. And now somebody's actually helping them, right?
I want to say, for people who may feel overwhelmed by the scope of all of this, there are these communities of practice out there, and that's what you hook into in the beginning. You don't have to recreate the wheel, and you don't have to start something from scratch. Things exist that you can join and then build upon.
Yeah.
We were recently down in Athens with our organization, with our workstation. They got a bunch of programs, you know, for people that don't make a lot of money. So they gave us all these pamphlets.
Yeah, there you go.
Sending them out to the staff.
Very good.
They don't have to let us know if they need help. They can go to the workstation.
Right.
They may have programs for their daycare that they would assist with the cost of it. So, you know, that's something new that we were doing.
Well, in all sorts of, you know, you can do that. One of the things we did early on was we had a resource fair like that, where we had all these community organizations come into a big room and set up with all their pamphlets and their staff. But then we had the employers come in and their HR and the success coach. And they went around and talked. We did like a speed dating thing where everybody went around and they just rotated around and talked to everybody so that they could all, and they were blown away. They were like, we didn't know this happened. And that really was helpful for Faith as well. The other thing, there's a great phrase, it's called the warm handoff, right? Warm handoff. That's a barrier for a lot of people. So that if Faith knows people in the community that work at these agencies, and even if she tells that person, when you call, talk to Judy. I like Judy. And Judy's wonderful. Call her and tell her what's going on and she will help you. Or even to, you know, go there with them if it's hard, right? But that's the thing. It's hard to do that, especially when you're working 60 hours a week and you're dealing with the rest of your life. That's hard to do, but that warm handoff really helps. It's back to that driving force of relationship. If relationship isn't there, it's not going to work. I'm going to briefly go over employer-sponsored small dollar loans just to give you an idea of that. But this is an amazing tool. And this is the thing. There's actually, there's a petition going around to reduce the payday lending interest you can charge from 591%, I think is what it is in Ohio right now.
Which is the worst in the nation.
Which is the worst in the nation, to 28%. It's going to go on the ballot. But this is typical, where if you get a payday loan for 90 days, you got to pay it back on 2 weeks, or take another one out for additional fees and charges, that at the end of 90 days, if you're able to pay a $500 loan off in 90 days, you've paid an additional $450. So for somebody that didn't have enough money to begin with, now they're 450 short in 90 days. I struggle with 450 short in 90 days, right? So that's that. And the employer-sponsored small dollar loan, usually it's a higher interest rate, but the total cost of paying it back in 90 days is $22. It's an agreement between the business and the credit union where they just work it up through HR and the loan gets deducted out of the paycheck and paid off over a longer period, 6 months or a year. And it can be, you know, from $300 to $1,200. It's all up to the business, what kind of arrangement they want to make. And this has been huge. In Toledo, and I like win, 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 win. So the employee wins because they have more money in their pocket and they've got money that they need to solve a problem when they need it. It comes in fast. The business wins because they got a more stable employee. The credit union wins because they're building their business and giving out loans and doing their mission. And the community wins because we're not sending all this money out for no good purpose and destabilizing families. And we were doing employer-sponsored small dollar loans. We started it like in June. Really, it took off in June of 2014. This is separate from the data I'm going to show you on the employer-sponsored small dollar loans that we did. But that's the data.
Nobody defaulted.
Nobody defaulted in this study. This was on a study with the Feline Research Institute. And if you want to stabilize your employees, employer-sponsored small dollar loans and employer resource networks, two of the fastest things you can do. And these were the partners in the loans, and we do have some of the providers are on that list in this, although their data wasn't reflected in the data that you just saw.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If your employee quits or gets terminated, you know, their employment's terminated, what happens to the loan? I mean,
the credit union handles it. It's on them. It's the agreements that they have. We've got 4 credit unions and 2 of them are closed. ProMedica and Mercy are 2 big healthcare providers. Sun Federal and Toledo Metro love it, and they have not. You know, it's on them. The default rate is lower than many of their loans. So they're building relationships and building their customer base, and they're really happy with it.
So our local credit unions, if we were to meet with them, we would suggest that they contact Sun Federal or Toledo Metro.
Yeah, or you can call me and I can try to connect with, and this is part of what we're going to get more systematic with. And again, APRA is helping us with this, but we're working with multiple partners as well. But if the community of practice in your neighborhoods where you've got folks, they can potentially talk to credit unions, or we can connect the folks at our credit unions with yours or whatever. But yeah, not everybody knows about this. There's actually Feline Research Institute. There's a lot of information. They've studied this. We were one of their pilot projects on this project. So just to review what we've talked about, you know, the Bridges Out of Poverty training, this is what we did. This is what we just talked about, break it down. Bridges Out of Poverty training for the staff and administrators so they better understand their employees. Getting Ahead in the Workplace classes for employees living with daily instability, and that's so they're now on the same page. You're talking the same language. You're now working together to solve problems and not at each other's throats.
A question on that is,
yeah.
And again, this will sound as a negative, but just as we're getting ready to gear up, what we're hoping is that our staff will go back for some additional training so they can get new increases in their wages through God's most recent initiative, we're working them to death.
Right.
For them to then have to do 60 more hours, we're trying to find ways that we can get, so they don't have to go anywhere, they can do it at home while they're with their kids.
Yeah, I see.
So that, my question is on the
Yeah.
classes, are we looking at internet connection?
No. So this has to be in person, but here's and it can be different in different places. Like, for example, tomorrow we already did this meeting, in December, and tomorrow James is coming into town in Toledo, and we've got, 11 businesses, none of them DD, that are coming together to go to that next meeting, where at the end of the meeting tomorrow, they're going to commit their HR folks for 3 months, right? And I also met, so that's the second one we're doing in Toledo. I met with the county commissioners on Tuesday morning, and their workforce development folks, and they were telling horror stories about manufacturing, right? And I was laying out the model, because the model is, and again, it's variable depending on, like, everyone is different, but what we shoot for, and my ideal picture, is that the employers pay for half of the staff and bennies of that success coach. Because until they get into it and they see that they're saving money, it's hard to get them on board, and they don't have the resource, a lot of them, right? And then another the rest of the money for this comes from other places, right? And if you're doing the Bridges Out of Poverty trainings and the Getting Ahead in the Workplace trainings, and one of the things, the Getting Ahead in the Workplace trainings, you pay your staff their wage to be in that class. Now, you may not be able to afford that initially, right? So you got to get a big chunk of this money, 40%, and we've got a model, we're working on budgets with to make requests to the Department of DD that, don't know if that's going to pan out, but to get these started, you got to raise a chunk of money from somewhere else, especially for the first year. But paying your staff to be there goes a long way. And we were, through the grant, staff were being paid overtime to be in those classes, right? And once they're in 3 classes, they're on board. They're loving it. And then that's what we find with the Getting Ahead in the Workplace trainings. These trainings are so different and so good, and it just lights a fire under people, and they start to, it's like they start to look at their own lives and what can I change to get more stable? And then they're on board. And then what we found in Toledo was that once after the first class, where we kind of cherry picked folks to be in it, but they were resistant and suspicious, after that first class, word got out, and now there's a waiting list, right? The other thing is, the next class, we've got a class scheduled for May. We got no more grant money. The ERN is raising money to do those classes because they know how valuable it is now. So they've got the money secured. They figured out how to do it. And I'll show you part of how they know the money is secured coming up. But so we do the getting, but you're right. Like one ERN, they may not be able to start in the same place that we started because we had all this resource. And those employees, I was going to tell you about the manufacturing. We're starting a third one. We're going to do a third ERN, but some of these employers, they are like in crisis. Like you guys are in crisis, but you can't expand. They're shutting down shifts. Their factories don't have the employees to run their factories. So they're not doing shifts because their turnover is so huge, right?
This is kind of a joke, but not really. Being on the chamber, we have the same challenge to our local manufacturing.
Yeah.
I really don't want them to know because they can pay more.
Right.
And that's self-centeredness, whatever, but I'd say that's.
Well, here's the thing.
I don't want McDonald's to know.
Stan, this is one of the things. get on board fast because you'll keep your employees.
Right.
Like you're going to be an employer of preference in your community, not because of the dollars that they're getting, right? But because of the way they are treated and respected and what you're doing. So, so we're doing, you know, we talked about all these things. Here are some of the outcomes.
Slide.
What's that?
Can we go back? I just wanted to say one thing because I don't think this point has been made. ERNs, the one in Toledo is the only DD-specific ERN in the country. Most ERNs have different industries and different parts and pieces and different sectors join that. So this was kind of an experiment up here.
And it was because of Debbie Enrick and because we wrote the grant that way. I actually think there's advantages with not having them be DD specific, especially if you're looking across Ohio in many counties, you don't have enough providers in some counties to do it. You got to pair with a hospital chain who's going to buy, you know, you might need to have an anchor organization that's a big employer, right? And then you have other organizations in it. But thanks, thanks, Anita. That's a great point. So here were the project outcomes that we had. We had the bottom three numbers add up to the top one, unless I did my math wrong. But 505 employees, 175 referrals. We also had community health workers that were engaged. They were functioning like the Success Coaches Lieutenant. That's another partnership that you can do. 289 employer-sponsored small dollar loans. Is that like, I was telling Anita before he came in, this slideshow is a mess because I just loaded in different slides from different presentations. It's not very pretty, but part of the reason for that is with the data is changing so quickly that I've just had to, I don't have a stable PowerPoint presentation. It's at least $150,000 in loans. Our largest employer, as of June, they just started doing employer-sponsored small dollar loans in January mid-January, and by June, I think they had given out the credit union had given out about $80,000 in employer-sponsored small dollar loans to their staff, and their staff had saved $10,000 additional.
And tell them about how that works with the savings account, because I don't think we talked about that
Well,
either.
with the employer-sponsored small dollar loan, part of what, if you don't have a bank account, you open the account at that credit union. And then the money comes out of your paycheck, as I said, to pay off the loan. At the time that the loan is paid off, the money then gets dumped into the savings account unless you opt out. Well, many people forget, right? And so they save. When I was researching this back in February of 2014, I called a credit union in Vermont that was doing it and asking, how does this work and what's going on? And the guy that ran that loan program said that day, one of his loan officers, somebody had one employer-sponsored small dollar loan. They came back in to get another one. And when the loan officer pulled up their account, they said, you know, you got $1,500 in your account. Do you want to take out another loan or do you want to take it out of your savings? And that employee had no idea, right? It was off the radar. And that happens to me sometimes. And I've got some degree of stability, right? But it was a lightning bolt of reinforcement for this employee. I'm going to take it out of my savings. I'm going to continue to have that money go into my savings so that I can build a reserve, right? Well, the other thing is we have Faith, the success coach. We have HR at the organizations and supervisors, and we have Faith hooks folks up with financial opportunity coaches in the community who coach folks on how to get more stable economically. And all three of them are singing from the same hymn book. They're saying, hey, when you get that loan, you want to take an extra $5 or $10 out and put it into savings. So they don't even have their loans paid off, but they're saving. And now they've got a relationship. They're building their credit. They've got a relationship with a financial institution. It's been huge. And we had 42 of the ERN providers going through the Getting Ahead in the workplace training. And again, that was like this groundswell of hope and optimism and engagement in the workforce going back up and making a difference in the agency. The total project outcomes, and we phrase this, we do talk about survival. I didn't understand what survival was for a while. Survival is, did you survive 1 month? Did you survive 3 months? What I have learned through this project is that if you survive 1 month, you're probably going to survive 3 months. And if you survive 3 months, you're likely to survive for a year. And it's not so much about turnover, because turnover, if you lose an employee that's worked there for 3 months, that is not the equivalent of losing an employee that worked there for 30 years. You got your value out of that 30-year employee. So the fact, if you're in a small organization, if you lose 2 30-year employees and 2 3-month employees, that's not really an accurate reflection. What's your survival rate? That's an interesting, you got to measure turnover, but survival is really important as well. So what this language is really specific. We only got, there were two of the organizations did not stay with the ERN. They were never, I don't think they were ever really bought in. 6 decided to continue and buy shares. They've coordinated, and one of the organizations bought more shares. 2 of the organizations bought more shares to make up the shares of the organizations that left. But of the 6 that stayed on, they had to hire 69 less employees. And they believe that the cost that they say is that they saved $288,000 in 2017 as a result of this project. So, you know, you talked about the other pain points. Those are increased too. And let me talk about, or decreased. Let me talk about some of those. And I'm also going to give some data on our largest organization that I've talked about. They really track survival rate well. And so the blue is their 30-day survival rate, and the red line is their 3-month survival rate. And they've been tracking survival for years and years, and they do a really good job at it. And this is on the left. I don't know if you can see it at the bottom, but it's, the points are 2014, 15, 16, and then 17 on the right. They went from up 14% in 2017. And these are their numbers. This is what they say. And this is what they say. 50 fewer employees needed to be hired in 2017 relative to 2016. And that saved them $225,000 in the year. Some of the other things that have happened, the chief HR officer, they do all staff meetings every year, right? Where it's a dog and pony show where the CEO and the HR staff and supervisors, and they go out, they have 25 meetings for 30 people each, right? And she's been there for 6 years. And she says most of them go okay, but there's about, 6 of those meetings where somebody gets up and starts grievancing, and it's really painful, right? You got to deal with that in a public meeting. And she said this is the first year they have not had a single negative complaint. Staff were addressing issues, they were identifying problems, but then they were following it up by proposing solutions. And she attributes it to the work that they've done, the change. She says they've gone from a good workplace culture to a great workplace culture as a result of this. Another thing is one of their other administrators said that on Thanksgiving weekend this year, it was the first Thanksgiving break, 4 days, that she did not have to open her laptop once because she got no calls. Their supervisor turnover has decreased, right? Why? Because they're not having to deal with as many problems. One of the interesting things, they're tracking their is this impressive? Because this is so impressive to me. They're tracking their survival rate, and throughout 2017, they're seeing their survival rate go up and up. And then they're looking back in the fall and they're saying, how could survival rate be going up consistently over the year, but over the summer in June and July, turnover rate went up as well? What's going on? What do you think happened? They cut the dead wood, right? They were finally in a place, and it happened organically, where the supervisors were not having to cover all the shifts. Have you ever kept people on because you needed to cover shifts that you might otherwise would have let go? This was not a strategy. Nobody talked about it. The supervisors just had more time. Does it take a lot of time to deal with a difficult employee, right? It takes a lot of time, and they were having to cover shifts. It happened without anybody proposing it as a strategy. They just started letting people go. Guess what happened then? Everybody else was happier.
Yeah.
Right? The other staff were happier. It's a pleasure to come into work now. The supervisors were happier. Right? Survival continues to increase. We were at a community meeting, and I was having the staff at this organization, I asked them to do a report, and the county commissioner was there, and he can be very forthright. And they were presenting this data, and he said, so you're saving all this money. Are you going to turn that around and give them raises now? And I was kind of like, oh, like I wasn't prepared for that question, and that could be an uncomfortable question. And here's the amazing thing. The staff at the organization said, we already have. This is the first time in 10 years they said we've occasionally given raises to people over the years, but this is the first time in 10 years we've been able to budget a raise. And then a lot of the other, well, let me give you another one. Their rate of applications tends to be about 80 a month. They get 80 applications a month for people with jobs. Guess how many they got in December? 400, right? 400. Word is out. People are telling each other, this is a good place to work. People are telling their relatives, go apply here, right? You want to be here. And then there's things as well, like when you're short staffed and under-resourced as an organization, you can't do the extras. You can't take people to the ballet or to the concert or to the zoo. They're able, so the individuals are getting, as you said earlier, it's about getting those individuals the care that they need as well. So this was we were in a meeting with Director Martin, and he asked about, he said we were doing a presentation on our results from this with a couple other counties that had done different things. And he asked, has there been any impact on workman's comp claims? And again, I had never thought about this, but I thought, well, there probably has. So I talked with the HR staff, and we were both like, well, it probably didn't make it any worse, right? And so we got the results of the workman's comp claims, which are good. I'll show you those in a second. And then I was talking to a restaurant owner and just telling him about this, and he said, what else you ought to check? Unemployment claims, right? I thought, oh yeah, that's true. So I called her up, said, check that. Here's the data. The blue is workman's comp claims for 15, 16, and 17, and the red is unemployment claims, and 2017 is on the right. So we're down from a total of it goes from over 161,000 to 141,000 to a total of 66,000 for both on the right. And again, they believe this is a consequence of all the other changes. If what percentage of unemployment claims or workman's comp claims are because somebody had a grievance? Probably not most of them, but some of them. And if you're uncomfortable or you're short staffed or you don't like your fellow employee and you're not going to ask them to help lift somebody, more chance of getting injured, right? So I wanted to show this map, and I've showed it before. We're working on this, and this is really in process. There are multiple supports. This is the organizations that can provide bridges out of poverty. Okay.
Yeah, we have a question.
Yeah.
Do you see that these results are scaled to the size of the organization?
That's a great question. Here's one thing. If you've got a bigger organization it depends on the culture and the organization and how much you adopt it. So we saw big organizations that were never on board, never got it. And if you're not applying it, it's kind of that, it can appear trite, but you get what you give.
Right. You gotta commit to it.
If you're not committed to it, you don't get the philosophy, you're not applying it, you're not doing everything you can to make it work, a big organization will not be as successful. We had a number of things with some of the smaller organizations where there were, stuff happens. Like we're just in a small organization, if you lose a couple key staff, it's hard to implement. And that may be easier to bear if you're in a large organization, but it really depends on the leadership to a great deal and how bought in you are. Any other questions online? So this is the organizations in Ohio that provide bridges training. So Lucas County Family Council is in the blue, but we're also taking over those not taking over, but
you're invading.
We're invading. It's a game of Risk. They're trying to take over Ohio, but the organization Partners in Hope is not going to be doing it anymore, and they've asked us to take over their region. But here's the point. There's multiple layering. So again, where are the credit unions that know what an employer-sponsored small dollar loan is and will partner with you? Where are the bridges out of poverty communities of practice? Where are the community health workers, if you want to use community health workers to supplement your success coach? And I'm working on several projects where we're really looking at how to get everybody all the information on what's going on in Ohio so that you can capitalize on all the partnerships that you can benefit from. Let me just say one other thing and think about questions, because I'm basically done with my presentation at this point. But one of the things that is so interesting, and I referred to this before, but is where faith has people in the community. Our success coach at our first ERN has relationships with people in the community and help her people. So you've got all these, you've got churches and faith-based institutions and not-for-profits and government and organizations that are working to support individuals to become more stable. And then you've got your success coach on the inside, and everybody's working better. Like, those organizations' outcomes are enhanced if they've got faith on the inside of the job, helping to support that worker. And if that organization is changing the way they do business to support that worker. So it's this amazing fit. And as I said, many of like I had high hopes for this grant. I did not think I was going to be telling you that these organizations would have combined saved $288,000, right? And that all the other things were occurred. The unemployment insurance was 2 weeks ago when I found that out. And we weren't even looking at that data. We weren't even thinking about it. There's all these unintended consequences. So I guess one of the things, if you get involved in this, it's hard work. It is complicated, but with fidelity, and it's also very adaptable and unique.
We learned a lot in Lucas, so we can make things happen faster.
Yeah, but get ready to be surprised and pleased.
I don't think you have to do everything. If you don't have the resources to do all of this, pick something. You know?
Right.
Start somewhere, because it's just layering and layering, and do something, whatever you can.
I could give you some figures that Kim was able to put together for us. This was really preliminary. That showed what our turnover costs. We've been trying to, really intimidating. We've been aware of, obviously, the higher turnover, but we wanted to see exactly what that quantifies down to. So she developed a spreadsheet, and it showed the training costs for our actual trainers, the hours for the staff to attend, the overtime hours that were being incurred because we were short-staffed, tons and tons and tons of different facets that went into this figure. And then we analyzed how many applications that we received last year, how many we retained, how many we lost, and at what interval. Was it within 30 days, within 90 days, within a year, whatever. And we received over 360 applications just for DSP positions, and we needed 40. We hired 125, retained 26, and it ended up costing us, and these were the preliminary low ball numbers, $457,000 in 2017 for 26 people that we ended up keeping. It's outrageous, and that was based on $3,007 per new hire employee, and it's significantly higher than that. But I've since talked with one of our superintendents that we have a great relationship with about this figure, and our turnover is the lowest in this county, so the figure wasn't as staggering when I hit him up for it. But I'm trying to partner with our different county boards. If you want us to help you with your waiting list, this is what it's going to take per employee. And he didn't freak out and run from my office, so we'll see how that goes. But $457,000.
Right.
And in a budget that's strained anyway, I would so much rather, again, freeze people quitting, put $457,000 equally into everybody's pocket.
Right.
Wouldn't that be phenomenal?
Right.
That's an amazing number.
It is, and it's just for onboarding. It is just for new employees. That's not recertifications and the hours and the time that goes into that. It is just onboarding that we ended up keeping 26 people. And since then, we grew by a few 24/7 homes, so I still need 34 staff.
You're still short.
I'm still short. So it is a never-ending cycle. And a lot of these concepts will help us with that. We've reached out with the local bank lady that used to be on my board, and she's considering it. She's going to go to the president of the bank very soon. My mother retired from this bank, so I think we've got a better shot with anyone else. And they called her.
Your connection.
Yes, my mother's last name is Palmerton, and they called her the Palminator. So I told Jody I would turn the Palminator loose on her if I didn't get the affirmative answer that I was hoping for. But there are, when Kim and I went to this training, the Bridges Out of Poverty training, I was raised in poverty. And being a stable adult, I realized as a child, I really didn't have any concept of what it was like being in an environment of poverty. But as an adult, I'm stable. So coming out of this training, I can't impress upon you enough how eye-opening it was to see from somebody else's perspective how they make decisions. And it was staggering to me. And I thought that I had some concept of what a lot of our staff went through. And until I went to this training, I really understand now. I had no idea. And it makes me sad because I hear some of my managers talk about, I can't believe she did that. Write her up, terminate this person. I'm like, wait a minute. and I find myself looking at things very, very differently. And I thought that I was, thinking of things very differently to begin with, but I've evolved. And this program has just been eye-opening to me. I really hope if you haven't gone through it yet, invest the time. It's so worth it. Invest your time and go through it. Not just your managers, but they are critical in changing their thinking as well. But it starts with you.
So yeah, and we really believe that the Bridges Out of Poverty, the Getting Ahead in the Workplace, the ERN, that you can do any of these things individually, and that can help. But this is kind of the recipe for what we're offering. And again, we are available. Contact Anita. We'll work with you to get this started. There's things to figure out, but you can figure it out as you go, and we'll provide you. Don't be overwhelmed. We'll provide the support and the guidance to make it. It's one footstep after another. So.
Can you talk a little bit about the ERNs more and how it's like I'm having trouble visualizing this. Like, do they just go for half a day to one company? They go to their office. We have group homes spread all over.
Right.
I'm
Trying to figure out how that
works. The boots on the ground details.
Well, that's one of those questions about, like, you work that out as you go. But we had those conversations. So when the success coach was hired, it's like, okay, one organization has like 50% of their staff in a big facility, and then 50% are out in the field. And, some of the smaller ones, it was all supported, it was all remote. So you may spend, like if you're in a factory, you just go spend a half day every week at that factory, and you have a private place to meet and a sign on the door, and
some employers
and go
did
in.
That,
and
provided a space for her.
Yeah, a space is important, the confidentiality, that people can stop in. But it's like, it's also getting their mobile, their text, number and the phone number, and making the calls, and then meeting at a library, meeting wherever, talking on the phone, starting, when are you working? It's for the success coach, it can be a big deal to try to juggle all that, but you make it happen.
Yeah, and the employers made Faye's cell number widely known. The staff had.
There's a brochure, there's marketing to do to get the word out. Faith would come to the the orientation meetings. When there's orientation meetings, whenever she can get to those, she gets out, and then the staff that are doing the orientation, they say, here's a benefit from being with our organization. We have these things. This is what, please call her. She's amazing. Here's her picture. They've got actually, I was thinking about this, but they've got a video in Lucas County of Faith describing what she does, and she's talking, so they can, if she's not there, they can just get on YouTube and show her talking about her job. And she talks about how she helps people and stuff. And she acknowledges, the difficulty that people have, like I know it, she says, like, it can be hard to get to work if you're dealing with this. And, and so people are like, oh yeah, that's me you're talking about, right? So there's all sorts of ways that it can be handled. And again, the beautiful thing, this is not somebody else imposing on your businesses. Let me give a couple more things, and is it okay if we go over a little? But
we're actually scheduled till 1.
Oh, okay. So I would have taken a lot longer. No. But if you, so you've got 6 members of the ERN, 6 employers, and they all sit together. And part of what the success coach does, and this is part of what's provided through ERN USA, is the software and template of a dashboard report that says all the organizations and how many referrals they got and what the referrals were for, et cetera, et cetera. you know, so that you can see, and there's a few success stories for each month, you know, actual little paragraphs on how somebody was helped. And then HR gets together. So here's a story from Grand Rapids. I think there's 22 ERNs in Michigan. There's only 2 in Ohio so far. It's gonna be 3 or 4 at least. But so they get together and they talk about stuff. So in Grand Rapids, there was one where there were a lot of food manufacturers on it. There were other businesses as well, but they were all in the same kind of geographical area of the city. And one of the HR people said, has anybody else had an issue with people showing up late for work? And one of the other employers said, yeah, we have. We've had a lot of write-ups for first shift, right? And they said, well, let's investigate. Let's go back and figure this out. So they went back and talked with their staff. A month later, they come back to the next meeting. Staff tell us that the bus is running about an hour late to get them to work on time. So that's why they're late. So these employers send a delegation to have a meeting with the Regional Transit Authority. And they say, we've got about 300 staff that work third shift between us. Can you move that bus route to about an hour earlier so our staff can get to work on time? And they say, sure, no problem, right? Would one employee going to the Regional Transit Authority be able to do it, or even one business? Probably not. But with, 8 businesses with 300 staff, they said yes. And while they were there, they said, oh, and by the way, can you just adjust the route so it stops in front of all our businesses, makes 5 more stops around this loop? And they're like, okay, we'll do that, right? That's possible with the network. That's the importance of the network. That's that sharing of information to be able to see what trends. Are people needing more help with utilities? What are people asking for? What are the issues? How can we coordinate a response to this that helps all our businesses? Another example, and I was talking with James the other day about this network concept. They've got 4 ERNs close to each other in Western Michigan, and each has 9 employees each. So they each meet independently every month to talk about what's going on with each other, but then they meet quarterly where they have representatives of those 4 ERNs meeting together to talk about what's going on. That's like, what is it, like 36? And what's the math? 4 times 9? But that many organizations working together, right? Training, paying for training. If you're a small organization, you may not be able to afford that. But figuring out those trends and dealing with those trends is a huge piece of why this network is important. And then you can make changes in scale. Another one was a childcare issue where they had no second shift childcare, right? And that became a need. It became obvious. They had data on it. And they went to the child care provider in the neighborhood that was open first shift but not second, and they said, we can guarantee you have 30 kids here every second shift. Can you open up another shift? And they're like, hell yeah, right? So they opened up another shift, and then within a few months they had opened up another, they had started another center across the street to deal with the demand, right? That's part of the economy of scale. Now, I've got a few more examples and I'm from Toledo, so they tend to be more urban examples, but you can do similar things in rural counties. It's just different. It's a different approach. It has to be different. It's a different circumstance. But what are the problems you're dealing with, and how do you come together to solve those problems in a rural area?
That would be one of my questions as I look at the opera membership, is many of us are multi-county.
Right.
And many of us are rural multi-county. And we don't have the transportation, we have a different transportation issue than Columbus has with buses because few of us have countywide transportation, and yet transportation is one of the major obstacles to moms.
Right.
Getting to work or
Right.
having reliable, and I know, that you have assisted with auto purchasing or things.
Right. Here's where, and I've been kind of banging, how you bang a drum and you never figure it out, or you just can't put the energy into it. But one of the things I'm saying is these employer-sponsored small dollar loans are going so well. At the last ERN meeting, I said, how can we do a similar thing, like conceptually similar, but for auto purchases, right? How can we do that? And for the first time, and it was like groupthink or whatever, but a couple people said, well, we know somebody at this auto dealership. We've got a relationship with them. If we do, through the credit union, do a similar kind of thing for auto loans, but make sure we've got a partnership with this dealer who basically is going to know, treat our folks well. I mean, a lot of the folks don't trust. Like, I know people that are, who are trying to transition, and they're spending money on card because they don't trust getting ripped off by the dealer. But if warm handoff, right? I talked about the warm handoff. If you say, go down there and talk to so-and-so, they're going to hook you up. They're going to give you a fair deal. If they don't, we're going to speak with them because we want our employees to have a good deal. It's those kind of things, they just start happening, right?
I think that's when I think about, we have two dealers in Urbana, and we're their largest customer. We have 125
There you go.
vehicles, and they like us, and they sponsor our golf tournament, things of that kind, but we've never used it to benefit those. So it's something else to think about. And then match that with the with the credit unions, and the idea that credit may be a challenge for them also.
Absolutely.
And possibly the dealer and the credit union can work out some of those challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've got to go to a meeting with Jeff.
I'm sorry.
On CDL.
She's not sorry you're meeting with Jeff. She's sorry that you have to go.
I'm sorry you have to leave us, Dan.
Enjoyed it very much.
Good.
Thanks, Dan.
Other?
Jessica, did you get your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
It's about because I just was envisioning, like, if you only have a half staff every 2 weeks, but if it's not, like, they're not necessarily, like, clocking hours, or they're not.
Right, and there's that thing, they're not saying we're only going to work with your staff Wednesday morning between 8 and 4,
Right.
or 8 and 12, yeah.
No, that doesn't happen.
No, it's not a 24/7, but it can sometimes see that way. And that's one of the challenges that the success coach has, because I haven't talked to one that doesn't really care deeply. And so they do get texts and calls at all times. So there is they have to figure that piece out about how to be on duty and how to not be on duty. But people are calling them when they have a need, right?
And because that position is so critical, we say you really need to pay them well and give them a good benefit package, right?
Is there a specific background you look at for that position?
Yeah.
It is not so here's what I say, and it may not even necessarily need a college degree, but here's what you need, and I kind of said this, and we've got job descriptions of like template job descriptions. That's part of the support that you get when you work through us to do it. But it's like, can that person speak in a language that the employers need and be responsive to those employers? And can they relate and build relationship and connect with the folks that they're working with? And one of the things about this is not just for DSPs. ERN is for any employee. So there's been, I don't know of any stories like this in Toledo, but in Michigan, there's been like somebody was getting, like they were over $100,000 annually, but they had a divorce and they were going through a rough time, and they met with a success coach. Anybody can get the services of the success coach in that organization. So, but I just lost where I was. What was the?
What's the qualification?
Oh, the qualifications, yeah. So it's that ability to connect. So you need to have, looking at those resources, you need emotional resources, you need mental resources, you need to be able to work a computer, all that stuff. If you're, some of the success coaches around the country, and that's a benefit of the network as well, and through the ERN Ohio, we will be hosting success coach meetings, right? Where you have a annual conference that you go to share struggles and stories and get support. There's going to be meetings online with, video where people can check in and how do you do this? But there's been success coaches that are HR that moved from an HR position into a success coach position. There's been folks that are social workers. There's been some folks that were Bridges Out of Poverty trainers. But, it's like that person that you like, that you have confidence in, that you trust, that's competent and capable, and also can, do all the business stuff that you need to do. And they can chart data, and follow up and be organized. So those are all what you'd want in a really fantastic staff,
Other questions, comments?
What are the next steps? Like, what are you envisioning, that people in Accra would get together for a ERN, or regionally you would try to reach out to people? How are ERN set up? Are they set up regionally? Are they set up statewide? Like, it sounds like I only have two.
Right. Here's what I would suggest as the next step. And if you're, I'm assuming I'm going to take liberties and volunteer Anita. But if you are interested in being involved in an ERN, contact Anita and create a list, because it does need to be regional, right? Now, the thing is, again, and I've talked about ERN USA with James and ERN Ohio with, like right now, there's only 2 groups in Ohio that are supporting the development of ERNs to provide you with the technical assistance and support. So if an ERN was started, and Heidi Jones, I had her on she's from Marion Matters, but we will be developing more partners that are working with ERN USA to help support the development of these. So say a group from this meeting decided, to organize an ERN in your region, and like, what partners do you want to have on the ERN? We do an opening meeting, something like this, maybe different but same purpose, is to say, this is what an ERN is. Okay, who's interested? There's going to be another meeting, right? And then you schedule that meeting, and that's the one where, okay, who wants to commit for 3 months with these people? Because you got to kind of sort it out. One of the things we're doing at the meeting tomorrow is we're going to say, ask questions like, how big is your organization? How many staff do you have? How many shares do you think you'd want, right? And are you ready to then commit? And it's like it's basically that demand. It's like the demand for the shares is what the limiting factor on how many businesses are engaged and how many you need to have engaged. Then that sets who's going to pay for the ERN, for the success coach when you go on. Now in Toledo, Lucas County again, some of these things that we recommended are provided through the community already. Like I do 1 Bridges Out of Poverty training a month in the course of my job that multiple organizations come to. And if you're lucky enough to live in an area where that's already happening, you don't have to pay for the Bridges Out of Poverty trainings. If you don't, you might have to raise money to make that happen. The other thing in the first year, one of the things that I have in my very tentative budget is Bridges Out of Poverty trainings built into the budget so that you can get certified. So that's a cost that's there for the first year to do a big training to certify people in your community to do the trainings. But then after that first year, you don't need to pay anymore because you're doing it within your, like there were two people from one of the provider agencies who got certified in Bridges Out of Poverty training. Now they can do Bridges Out of Poverty trainings for the ERN. Based on the license with AHA process, they can do that with no charge and as a part of their work. So this is where I'm talking about some of the complexity, and that's different from the question you asked. But did I answer your question?
You did, yeah.
Good.
Contact Anita.
Contact Anita, because we are like, this is the best thing, the most effective, powerful thing I've ever been involved in. Like, I've done a lot of fantastic stuff, but in terms of like really concrete, like it exceeded my expectations, and that's difficult. It's difficult to exceed my expectations. And so I'm really excited about it. I think we're really excited about it. There's a lot of people that want to make this go just for the good of
And I want to thank the Lucas County providers that decided to participate in this, because they've stumbled and fell and bruised their knees and whatever so that we could learn from this. So
Yep.
I want to thank them. Anything else?
Anyone online?
Stephen, did you bring cards or anything in case people want to contact you?
No, but could you send my contact
I will.
information?
I will.
Anyone,
Contact Anita, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, contact Anita. She'll
anyone online? The line is
Any questions online? Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Mm-hmm.